Back in the year 2007, we were flying a routine Navy patrol over the North Atlantic, and nothing about that morning suggested our lives were about to change forever. The sky carried that dull steel gray that matches old ship hulls, and the wind had the kind of cold bite that settles into your bones whether you like it or not. The ocean pushed slow, heavy swells that rolled beneath our Seahawk as if something deep below was breathing beneath a blanket. I served as an oceanographer on the USS Ross back then, and they sent me out on the bird for a simple sensor drop. Lieutenant Jenna Caldwell sat at the controls, steady and calm, with the kind of hands you trust without needing to think about it. Petty Officer Travis Harlon manned the gun position with his boots dangling out like he owned the whole ocean. I sat behind them with my gear case feeling half bored before we had even left the deck. We had done this run so many times that the routine felt burned into muscle memory. Drop sensors, record temperatures, sweep the grid, return home, nothing dramatic, nothing worth a story. The rotors thumped through the cabin with that deep vibration you feel along your ribs more than your ears. Cold air seeped in each time we opened a panel, and my fingers stiffened as I armed the first drift sensor. Harlon laughed at the way I flexed my hands and told me I sounded like a spoiled lab tech. I told him he could jump out if he felt brave enough, and we both let it end there. Caldwell kept us low, skimming over choppy water while I prepped another sensor. I pulled the lever and watched the small cylinder disappear into the waves like it was nothing more than another forgettable entry in a long line of readings. A few seconds later, I checked the numbers and felt my brow tighten. Surface temperatures looked wrong, too cold. Caldwell shrugged when I mentioned it, and Harlon muttered that the whole ocean out here felt off. We turned east for the next drop point, and the horizon stretched empty in every direction with no gulls, no fishing boats, no signs of life at all. The loneliness of that water pressed against us in a way I could not explain. We drifted through another patch and I set up the next sensor. Boredom hovered over us like a heavy cloud until Harlon suddenly cut his laugh short and leaned forward in a frozen stare. "Hold up, what is that?" His voice dropped low and sharp, not his usual joking tone. Caldwell eased the bird down a little and circled while I pressed my face to the window. At first, I thought he had mistaken a whale or a capsized boat. Then my eyes found it clearly, a huge dark mass floating half-submerged but not behaving like anything natural. No rolling motion, no rise, no fall, just a still shape riding the swell with a strange weight. Caldwell circled tighter. I raised my binoculars and felt my stomach twist. It looked like the front portion of a massive shark head larger than the Seahawk itself with gills wide and heavy, yet the entire back half was gone. Not torn like from rot or scavengers, but missing in one clean sweeping arc as if something enormous had taken a single bite and left nothing behind. The wound curved smooth like a blade cut through it, but teeth had done this. I lowered the binoculars, then looked again, certain my eyes were tricking me. They were not. The snout thick and blunt, the jaw huge. Even with only the front third remaining, the thing dwarfed our aircraft. Harlon raised his camera and snapped picture after picture, while Caldwell kept us steady. A rotten, sour smell drifted into the vents and made the three of us flinch. I studied the teeth, triangular, serrated, nearly the length of my forearm, the kind of teeth you only see in old textbooks about extinct giants. Caldwell asked what could carve a creature like that. I had no answer, none I wanted to say out loud. We hovered 80 feet above the carcass as gulls circled but refused to land. I radioed the Ross and reported a large biological contact of unknown origin. They asked for size and condition, and I gave the only description that made sense, though it sounded insane even as I said it. A large shark-like creature missing its entire rear half, removed by a single curved bite. They told us to return and that a recovery team would handle the rest. Caldwell made one last pass, and I stared at the jaw while the waves lifted the huge, lifeless head. Something dark leaked into the water, leaving a faint stain. Harlon whispered that whatever this creature was, it should not exist here or anywhere. On the flight back, none of us spoke. The bird felt smaller than I remembered. The cold air heavier, the ocean wider. We landed on the Ross, and the deck crew watched our approach with uneasy faces like they sensed we had brought trouble with us. Once we stepped off the Seahawk, everyone moved quickly. They pulled my notes, they grabbed Harlan's camera, they hustled us to CIC. I gave a full account of everything we saw, and the room fell silent when I described the smooth arc where the body had been severed. The Ross shifted course immediately, and within an hour we reached the site. Fog thickened and the water rolled harder, but the carcass had hardly drifted. From the deck, the thing looked even larger, more ancient, more wrong. A rigid boat team prepared to head out, and I joined them with divers ready to examine the remains. When we pulled alongside the carcass, its size became overwhelming. The head rose and fell like a stone shaped by nightmares. One diver pried part of the jaw open and revealed teeth longer than my hand. He removed one loose tooth and handed it to me, heavy, cold, sharper than anything natural should be. The proportions matched only one known species from ancient records. A Megalodon, and something had taken half of it away like it was nothing. When we secured lines to haul the head closer to the Ross, the full horror settled in. The missing half was a clean arc, no struggle. No ragged tearing, just one perfect bite. I took measurements, sent data to the research center, and waited. Their reply held nothing but more questions. They knew what I suspected. Something had killed a giant that should have ruled the ocean, and whatever did it might still be below, watching us move above its territory. The submarine, USS Virginia, waited like a silent steel coffin when the small boat ferried me across the cold morning swells. And the moment I stepped aboard, Commander Rachel Sato met me at the hatch with her usual calm presence that somehow made the air feel tighter. I had met her once before and knew she never wasted words. She took my hand in a firm shake, then motioned for me to follow her below deck. "Your report is unusual," she said with a steady tone that gave nothing away. I told her unusual was the only honest word for it. She nodded and said that higher command wanted a complete seafloor survey beneath the carcass site. Her eyes did not reveal anything else, but the way she spoke made it clear they were unsettled and hungry for answers. She guided me into the wardroom where the crew waited around a table. I set the loose Megalodon tooth on the metal surface, and the room fell silent, as though every man aboard suddenly forgot how to breathe. "That thing came from the carcass," I said. "Proportions match fossil records, and the rest of the body is gone, taken in one smooth bite. Not a tear, not a drag, just removed." The crew listened with widening eyes. Sato stood with her hands clasped behind her back and laid out the mission. "We go under, we map the bottom, we document anything we find. No contact, no engagement. Nothing leaves this boat, not a single detail." The crew nodded with the grim acceptance of people who understood what secrets cost. The Virginia sank beneath the surface an hour later. Every sound softened into a heavy hum as the water swallowed the light. The steel walls moaned with pressure while the air grew stale in the tight corridors. I strapped myself at a sonar console and watched the numbers climb as we descended into darkness so thick it felt almost physical. At a few hundred feet, the ocean outside turned into a black void with no recognition, no shape, no limit. Sonar pings echoed slowly at first, then with strange distortion, as though something in the deep soaked up the sound. Then we felt it. A low vibration passed through the hull like an unseen fist knocking softly on a door. A few crew members froze. Before anyone could speak, a long, deep pulse rolled through the boat. Not noise. Not water, something else. A pressure wave that rattled the bones more than the ears. Teeth buzzed. Hands twitched. Someone whispered what was that, but no one had an answer. Readings flickered on one of the displays. For a brief moment, the seafloor shot upward on the map, then dropped again, as though something huge passed between us and the bottom. The sonar tech stared at the glitch and shook his head. "That is not normal," he said. And he looked pale. When we reached the target depth, Sato ordered the launch of the first unmanned drone. The crew moved quickly with tension hanging over them like a heavy curtain. They pushed the small machine out into the endless dark, and the cameras clicked on. Grainy shapes formed, the seabed flat and bleak. Nothing remarkable. The drone drifted across sand and scattered rocks, and tiny creatures flickered in the lamps, but everything seemed unnaturally still. Then the feed cut to black. "Switch cameras," Sato said. "Already did," the tech replied. "No signal." "Recall it," Sato ordered, but the drone did not respond. The tether jerked once so hard the entire arm assembly shuddered. Then the line went slack like something cut straight through it. When they reeled it in, the end of the tether came back perfectly sliced. No fraying, no pulling, no twisting, just a clean cut. The tech checked the time stamp. It happened the exact moment that strange pulse hit us. I wrote that down and felt a knot twist inside my stomach. Hours passed with the crew growing more tense as sonar struggled to make sense of the strange distortions filling the water around us. Each time a faint reverberation rolled along the hull, people glanced at the bulkheads as though expecting a crack to appear. Sato asked for thoughts during a quiet moment, and I told her plainly that whatever killed the Megalodon was down here and that we might have drifted into its territory. No one doubted it. The Virginia continued its slow patrol through the trench, while cryptic reports from the Ross arrived every few hours. The carcass was deteriorating unnaturally fast. Divers found new tears in the remaining flesh each morning. The ship recorded heavy thumps against its hull before sunrise. The water surrounding it fell silent. No dolphins, no whales, no movement. Only deep knocks that vibrated along the metal skin of the ship. On the Virginia, sonar soon displayed something none of us had witnessed before. The tech called me over, pointing at a massive dark blotch in the center of the screen. A blind arc, no returns, no detail. No outline, as if something immense absorbed the sonar entirely. He swallowed hard. Sir, that blind zone is larger than this submarine. Much larger. We watched it shift on the display, sliding a few meters at a time like something enormous was turning beneath the water. Then the dark zone vanished, but returned seconds later in a new position, far closer. Sato stood behind us with her hands on the chair, watching in silence. Log every detail, she said, and still her jaw tightened slightly, betraying the fear none of us dared to voice. I scribbled notes as fast as I could. Whatever was down here did not behave like rock and did not behave like machine. It reacted to our sonar, it moved with intent, it stayed close. And the deeper we went, the more certain I became that the dead Megalodon we found was not an isolated event, but a warning sign left floating at the surface by something far older and far more dangerous still hunting below us. Tension thickened through the Virginia as we tracked that shifting dark void on sonar for the rest of the day, and no one dared speak above a whisper, because every man aboard felt the truth in his bones that something enormous and alive was moving in the deep with patience and purpose. Commander Sato approved the launch of a second drone, even though everyone remembered the first one vanishing with a clean slice through its tether. Orders from command demanded more data, and the crew worked in a strained silence as they prepared the new drone. They double-checked the tether and reinforced the housing as though any layer of metal could matter against whatever lurked outside. When the drone slipped into the black water, the feed flickered with static, then sharpened and revealed a seafloor that looked more scarred than before. Sediment drifted past like dust in a forgotten tomb. I leaned close to the screen. "Pan left," I said, and the pilot slowly turned the drone. At first it looked like a cluster of pale ridges, then the shapes came into focus. Bones, massive white arcs piled together in twisted heaps. Whale vertebrae scattered in large sweeping mounds. Ribs bent inward like something crushed them with a single strike. No natural decay. No drag marks from scavengers. These were feeding remains left behind by a creature that had hunted here for a very long time. The camera drifted forward, more bones, a shattered skull, the spine of some creature too warped to identify. The room fell into a deep, unnerved silence. "This is not random," I said quietly. "This is a kill zone." The drone moved deeper into the trench. Every inch held more evidence of violence and power. Whole lives ended in seconds. No struggle, no escape. A graveyard arranged by time and hunger. Then the screen shook as a pulse rippled through the water. The drone lights flickered. Sediment exploded upward like something immense displaced the water nearby. "Pressure spike," the sonar tech warned. "Something coming." The drone struggled to steady itself. The pilot gripped the controls with both hands. A shadow drifted across the screen, swallowing the camera view in darkness. Not a shape, not an outline, just absence, a hole in the light. "Retrieve it," Sato ordered. The tether yanked hard enough to rattle the arm assembly on the deck. The drone twisted violently. Then the feed dissolved into static so bright it washed the entire room in pale flicker. "Cut power," Sato said. The screen went black. The tether slackened, and when we reeled the drone back, the hull was crushed in one clean uniform compression. Not one side bent, not twisted, flattened as if something enormous pressed both hands together and squeezed the machine with deliberate force. That confirmed what we feared. Something not just big but impossibly strong. Strong enough to kill with minimal effort. The crew stared at the broken drone without speaking. The fear on their faces was not wild panic, but the quiet realization that we had entered a realm where no human vessel truly belonged. While we fought to understand what stalked the trench, the Ross reported worsening activity topside. Each message held more dread. Divers refused to enter the water. They claimed they saw something glide beneath the carcass during the night, a long, smooth shadow that matched no known animal. One diver said he felt the water shift behind him, as if a massive body passed silently near the surface. Another morning, they found blood on the deck where the carcass was tied, not from human injury, not from natural rot. The head of the Megalodon had fresh pieces missing, clean strips taken in narrow arcs. Like something sampling the body, testing it, playing with it. Back on the Virginia, sonar painted an even darker picture. The blind arc returned at random intervals, sometimes far away, sometimes close enough that the tech stepped back from the display like the creature might burst through the hull. Crew morale crumbled. Men barely touched meals. Some whispered they could hear faint pulses when they tried to sleep. Others felt vibrations in the bunks like the deep itself was breathing beneath them. Even the ocean outside seemed to know something was hunting. No whale song, no scattered fish, nothing. Total silence. Then one night, sonar captured a single distressed whale call, long, broken, full of fear. The creature was fleeing at high speed. Then came a dull crack so heavy, it made a few crew members flinch. The sonar screen filled with drifting specks. The tech whispered in a hollow voice that it was bone scatter. I demanded visual even though I knew we had no drone left. Nothing came through but the sonar map. A massive displacement curve glided across the field, blocking everything. It moved in a slow, sweeping arc, then vanished. That was not chance, that was feeding. We forwarded the report to command, and their reply was cautious, almost frightened. They ordered us not to provoke anything, not to engage, collect data only. That told me they knew this creature was not a myth or a mistake. It was real, it was hunting, and it had killed a whale just yards from our boat without hesitation. Later that night, sonar caught another noise, deep, heavy, muted like two colossal stones striking one another in the dark. Then the ocean went dead silent again, a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if the deep were holding its breath. I wrote down every detail while my hands trembled. The Megalodon carcass was being consumed piece by piece. Whales were dying without struggle. The blind arc followed us like a shadow. We were inside a predator's hunting territory. It moved with intent, it fed with precision. It did not fear our presence. It barely cared that we existed. And that realization settled into every person aboard the Virginia before we reached the next grid point. We were not exploring the trench. We were trespassing in the domain of something ancient and powerful, and fully aware that we were there. By the time we reached the next operational phase, the entire crew of the Virginia carried the look of men walking into a storm they could not see. And every step felt heavier than the last as we braced ourselves for whatever the deep held. No one hid their fear anymore. Even the strongest voices on board had become quiet, uncertain, worn down by the repeated pulses that rattled our ribs and the shifting blind zones that moved like living walls of darkness surrounding us. Commander Sato assembled the crew in the control room, and her voice stayed steady even though the tension in her shoulders told a different truth. Our mission remains the same, she said. We gather data. We remain sharp. We survive. There was no argument, because what else could we do? Orders from above chained us to the trench, and none of us had authority to break them. So we returned to aggressive mapping. Hard sonar pings spread out every minute, sending wide sweeps, then narrow sweeps, then high-frequency bursts meant to force a clearer picture of whatever lurked beyond our reach. But instead of clarity, the blind zone split like a shadow, dividing into two separate arcs, drifting apart, then sliding back together like massive shapes weaving around each other. Then it moved upward a few hundred feet before dipping again with a slow, searching motion that felt deliberate. "It is reacting to us," the sonar tech whispered with haunted eyes. Sato nodded and told him to log every second. I watched the sonar waves ripple outward, only to vanish inside that void, as if sound itself died inside the creature's presence. Around midday, the boat lurched gently, then harder, as though an invisible wave shoved us. Loose items rattled, lights flickered weakly, crew grabbed whatever rails they could reach. The hull groaned with an eerie tone that sounded more alive than mechanical. "Pressure is shifting," someone yelled. I asked if it was seismic, but the navigator shook his head and said no quake signature. Another slow, heavy wave rolled through the water, pushing at us like a massive body drifting nearby. It was not random, it was displacement caused by a living giant. Then the hull trembled again, but this time the vibration stretched along the starboard side in a long, dragging glide. Metal hummed beneath my feet. It felt like something enormous brushed against us gently, almost playfully, as though it were investigating our shape. Everyone froze, breath halted, eyes wide, not a scrape, not an impact, a deliberate glide. A creature feeling the hull, sonar showed nothing, just distortion. That meant the blind zone covered everything. My hand shook as I wrote a single line, "It knows we are here." Meanwhile, the Ross faced their own terror above. Reports came through in clipped, anxious bursts. The Megalodon head was shrinking each day as more flesh vanished in clean arcs. Motion sensors triggered repeatedly through the night, always beneath the waterline, always near the carcass. Sometimes soft like a curious nudge, sometimes violent enough to shake the deck plates. Divers refused to even lean over the railing. Officers could not blame them. Something out there was eating the remains piece by clean piece and studying the vessel holding it. Back in the Virginia, crew morale cracked. Whispered arguments erupted in the narrow passageways. Tempers flared. Sleepless men accused each other over small mistakes. Senior enlisted approached Sato quietly and suggested leaving the trench before someone fell apart completely. They spoke calmly, which said more than shouting ever could. Sato listened without dismissing them, but her orders held firm. "We continue," she said, "but we take no unnecessary risks. Rest rotations, steady pace." No panic. Her leadership steadied the room for a moment, yet we all knew the deep was wearing us down. Later that night, sonar captured something new. A curved outline flashed in a single frame, not sharp, not detailed, but large enough to cover most of the screen. The outline vanished instantly, but the silence in the control room lasted long after. Sato asked me what it looked like. I swallowed the dryness in my throat and said that the curve matched the bite radius on the carcass. No one spoke after that. We were no longer guessing. We were sharing water with the same predator that tore a Megalodon in half. When most of the boat tried to sleep, I sat in the wardroom alone, staring at my notes. The pulses felt stronger that night, pressing through the hull in a slow, measured rhythm. It did not feel like random sound. It felt like a living presence scanning the water. I placed my hand on the bulkhead and felt a faint tremor moving up my palm. The same beat as the sonar pulses. It was sensing us, studying us, deciding something. A secure call came from the Ross. It was Caldwell, sounding tired and strained. She said the carcass was disappearing fast. Whole sections stripped away in the dark, motion sensors triggered nonstop, heavy knocks thundered against their hull. I asked if they kept distance, and she said they were not drifting closer by choice. Something below was pulling the carcass downward like bait. That image chilled me deeper than anything we had seen so far. Near the end of the watch, the Virginia caught one more sonar return, a sweeping curve. Too large, too smooth. The tech whispered that he thought it was the head. Then the return vanished in one smooth motion, like the creature had slipped out of detection range with ease. That was when I understood something none of us wanted to face. We had not seen all of it, not the full body, not the true scale, only fragments, only hints, and the parts we had glimpsed were already larger than anything that should exist. Something colossal lived here. Something with intelligence, something that fed on giants and swam through the deep as if nothing could challenge it. and we were still descending into its world. The decision to descend toward the trench felt like stepping into the throat of a living creature, and every man aboard the Virginia knew it, even if none of us dared to say it aloud, because the order came straight from command, and no one in uniform had the power to refuse. The blind zone kept drifting toward a deeper section of the canyon, so Sato believed we had no choice but to follow it, or lose our only chance to understand what hunted these waters. The descent began slow and controlled, and I watched the depth readings drop in steady increments while the hull groaned like an old beast fighting against the weight of the sea. The lights dimmed as we slipped through colder layers, and the boat felt as though the ocean had wrapped both hands around it trying to pull us down. Sonar returned patchy signals again, not fully blind, but hazy like distant static. It reminded me of watching a storm creeping toward you through fog. The pulses returned two heavy, slow beats that throbbed through the metal. One sailor whispered that it felt like a giant heart matching the rhythm of its own breathing. Another snapped at him to be quiet, but fear had already gripped the crew and silence did nothing to calm it. When we reached the target depth, Sato gave the order to launch the third drone, and the crew moved with shaky discipline. They checked the reinforced tether and secured the camera housing, even though we all knew that no amount of preparation would stop whatever crushed the second drone. The machine slipped into the water and its feed blinked alive. Murky light illuminated drifting clouds of sediment swirling like dust in a haunted room. The drone settled on the trench floor, and the lamps revealed a vast pale expanse streaked with shadow. The walls of the trench loomed jagged and scarred in ways that looked unnatural. Not shaped by erosion but scraped by force, we moved forward slowly. What appeared first as scattered shapes soon formed into clear details: bones, a field of bones, whale ribs curved like broken arches, vertebrae stacked in long trails across the floor. Giant skulls warped and shattered under enormous pressure. These were not ancient remains slowly collected by time. These were feeding remnants. The trench was not only a graveyard. It was a hunting ground. My voice cracked as I said that the creature lived here and that these kills were not accidents. Sato leaned closer to the screen and asked for an estimate. Hundreds, I said, maybe more hidden beneath the sediment. The sheer scale of death was overwhelming. The crew muttered prayers under their breath. No one looked away. Then the pulses returned stronger than before. The drone trembled. Sediment shot upward in thick waves. The pilot fought the controls, but the image shook violently. Something massive approached. The drone lights flickered erratically. A dark presence swept across the frame and swallowed all visibility. Not a shadow, not an outline, a complete absence of light, as if the water itself had been replaced by a void. "Retrieve it," Sato commanded. The tether jerked so violently that the entire assembly rattled. The drone twisted erratically and the pilot cursed under his breath. Then the feed turned to static with a sound like tearing metal. "Kill the power," Sato said sharply. The screen went black. We reeled the drone back in, and when it surfaced, it was flattened completely. Not crumpled, not bent, pressed together with such uniform pressure that the reinforced steel shell had folded like a thin sheet. A few sailors stepped back in terror. Something in that trench had crushed a Navy machine with one effortless motion. The air inside the sub grew heavier from that moment on. Pressure anomalies began sweeping across the hull in irregular waves. They were not strong enough to breach us, but they were violent enough to throw unprepared sailors against bulkheads. Lights flickered green, then white, then normal again. Magnetic sensors jumped wildly. Needles spun without pattern. Environmental readings showed nothing out of the ordinary, yet several sailors complained of sharp headaches and dizziness. A few vomited without warning. Sato demanded updated readings, and when she heard everything looked normal, she knew the truth without saying it. Something outside the boat was affecting us, something alive. The worst pulse struck without warning, like a giant fist smacking the hull. The deck shuddered, a table overturned, a metal cup clattered across the room, crews snapped, voices rose, arguments ignited over nothing. One senior enlisted slammed the table and shouted that we needed to leave the trench. Another officer fired back with trembling fury. Months of fear boiled in that single moment, and the pressure inside the control room matched the weight of the ocean outside. Then Sato stepped in. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She simply said, "We continue, but we stabilize first. Everyone rests. No one panics." The entire room obeyed instantly because her calm voice cut through the fear like a blade. Still, her presence could not hide the truth that the crew was falling apart under the weight of the unknown. The deep was not simply dangerous. It felt sentient. It felt aware, like a place shaped for something that did not want us there. Hours later, coded instructions arrived from command: continue operations, gather all data, avoid direct interference, no mention of crew welfare, no mention of leaving the trench. They wanted information at any cost. Men clenched their jaws in frustration but followed the order because the Navy did not leave room for debate. Toward the end of the shift, sonar erupted with sudden movement. A massive displacement arc surged into range. Pulses hammered the hull, cups rattled off counters, alarms blared, rails shook in our hands. "Brace yourselves," someone shouted. A pressure wave slammed into us so hard the plates vibrated underfoot. Lights flickered into emergency mode. Another wave hit stronger than the last. The boat rocked violently. Equipment crashed to the floor. Crew screamed for support. The deep itself roared. And in that moment we understood that the creature was not just near us. It was aware of us, it was reacting to us, and it was far more powerful than anything we had faced so far. When the largest pressure wave struck the Virginia, the submarine rattled so violently that several sailors lost their footing and alarms shrieked through the control room as lights blinked in and out like frightened eyes struggling to stay open. For a moment, we hung there in total stillness with only the faint hum of the reactor returning one flicker at a time as if the boat itself was trying to climb out of shock. Crew scrambled across the deck checking for ruptures, leaks, or breaches. Faces pale, hands shaking, breath coming too fast. Everyone knew that whatever hit us did so on purpose. Systems rebooted slowly, panels flashed amber, air scrubbers hiccuped. The life support hum stuttered like a tired heartbeat. Commander Sato stood straight at the center of the room, scanning every console with narrowed eyes. She demanded status reports. The reactor was steady. Navigation flickered in and out. Then ballast control reported trouble. Ballast tank 2 was flooding when it should not have been. The deck tilted forward at a slow, steady angle just enough to send loose tools clattering across the floor. We were descending again, not by command. Not by mechanical failure, forced downward. The navigator shouted our depth reading. We were sinking too fast. Manual override now, Sato ordered. Crew rushed to the ballast station, opening panels, wrenching valves, fighting controls that seemed to resist every adjustment. The tank refused to seal. Numbers kept dropping. Water kept filling. It felt as if an invisible hand pushed us deeper. Then finally a shout rang out. "The valve is closing, Mom." The boat steadied. The tilt leveled out. The descent slowed. A wave of relief slid through the crew, but it lasted only a moment before 3 deep pulses rolled through the hull like giant footsteps walking across the ocean floor. They came from every direction. The metal vibrated, rails shook. Loose bolts rattled in their housings like teeth chattering. The sonar tech whispered that we were surrounded. He was right. The screen showed displacement on all sides. Not one direction, all around us. The blind zone returned too massive to display in full. It split into shifting arcs, then reformed, then faded, then returned again so close that the tech took a step back from the screen. He said the creature was too large for sonar to read in one shape, so the system displayed only fragments, portions, segments of something colossal circling our submarine. Sato remained unflinching. She ordered a slow ascent and quiet trim. No sudden shifts, no noise. A junior officer broke under pressure and asked why rise instead of holding depth. "Because it is pushing us down," she said, "and I will not allow it." For half a minute the slow ascent worked. The boat rose by careful increments, then something struck the port side. Not a slam, but a heavy push that rolled the deck nearly 30 degrees. Sailors stumbled. A coffee mug shattered. A wrench slid across the floor. "Compensate," Sato snapped. The helm tried, but another force collided with us from below, lifting the boat just enough to send a haunting groan rippling through the hull. The sound of bending steel under immense pressure fills a man with a dread no words can capture. Pressure gauges spiked. The deck tilted further. Someone yelled that the readings were hitting the danger line. The boat lurched onto its side. My shoulder slammed against a panel. Another sailor tumbled across the control room and hit the far wall. Darkness fell as the lights flickered out. For a breath we dangled there, a metal coffin suspended in an abyss ruled by a creature too large to comprehend. Then a faint emergency glow returned. The sub groaned again, as if it were clutched in a giant hand. A scraping vibration slid along the starboard hull, not grinding, not tearing, just smooth, heavy contact like an immense body gliding past us only inches away. The sonar tech whispered a prayer, his voice trembled. The creature drifted off and the boat jerked back upright. Not fully, but enough to let us breathe again. Helm shouted that the ascent was failing. It felt like pushing through thick tar, like the ocean around us was resisting. Like the creature was deciding whether to let us go. Tension built until the radio crackled alive with a desperate call from the Ross. It was Caldwell, her voice sharp with terror. "Halt, the carcass is moving." The crew heard shouts, wind and metal snapping in the background. Something is pulling it from underneath. Cable 2 just blew. It is submerging. Then a roar of wind and water blasted through the channel. The last cable snapped. The carcass was dragged downward like hooked bait, disappearing into the dark. Someone aboard the Ross screamed. Then static swallowed the line. The dead Megalodon was gone, taken whole. The timing was no coincidence. We knew it. The Virginia shook again, but the force was weaker this time. The pulses softened. The displacement arcs drifted away. Whatever tested us seemed satisfied. Systems steadied. Lights brightened. The deck leveled. The hull stopped groaning. One by one, the consoles returned to life. The sonar display cleared and the blind zones faded into ordinary scatter. The tech whispered that the creature was leaving. Sato ordered us to ascend. No risks, no dips, no sudden movements. We obeyed. The Virginia rose inch by inch with a reverence normally reserved for sacred ground. When we finally broke away from the deepest pressure, the ocean around us returned to normal. No pulses, no distortions, no tremors, just cold, quiet water. Too quiet. The Ross came back on comms, their voices shaken but alive. They reported the carcass was gone, torn from their cables, and pulled straight into the trench. Sato acknowledged with a grim nod. Then new orders arrived from command. Both vessels were to leave the area immediately, all findings classified, silence absolute, no debate, no exceptions. And as the Virginia turned from the trench, I could not shake the truth that sat heavy in my chest. We were not saved, we were not rescued, we were allowed to leave. The upward climb from the trench felt like rising out of a nightmare, and yet none of us felt relief because every man aboard the Virginia understood that the creature below had made a choice, and its choice was to let us live. The sonar tech stared at the screen until the blind zones vanished entirely, and only normal scatter returned. "It is leaving," he whispered. Sato ordered a quiet, steady ascent, with no dips and no noise, because even though the trench lay behind us, none of us believed the danger had passed. For long minutes, the submarine rose through calmer water. The pulses faded, the distortion cleared, the overwhelming pressure of the trench eased off our hull, and the boat breathed again. When we reached a safer depth, the ocean around us sounded normal for the first time in days. That silence carried its own weight, though a stillness not from peace, but from the absence of a predator whose presence had reshaped the deep. Soon the Ross came back on comms, and Caldwell reported in a flat, exhausted voice that the carcass had been pulled straight down with such force it rocked the entire vessel. There was nothing left to retrieve, nothing left to study. It had been claimed by whatever lived below. Then final orders from command arrived. Leave the area immediately. Classify all findings. No exceptions. No debate. No record beyond select internal channels. The Virginia turned away from the trench with engines humming low and controlled while the Ross did the same. The ocean rolled around us as if nothing unnatural had happened, but we all saw through the lie. Something ancient lived down there. Something strong enough to rip apart a Megalodon and play with a nuclear submarine like it was a drifting toy. By the time we reached port, the sense of dread had only grown heavier because every man knew what awaited us. They separated us as soon as we docked. No contact between crew members, no sharing experiences, no questions. Each of us was taken to cold rooms with metal chairs and bright lights where different officials repeated the same inquiries again and again, trying to see if our stories matched. They were not searching for truth. They already had the logs, they had the sonar recordings, they had the images. They were searching for inconsistencies they could erase. They asked what I saw, what I heard, whether I believed the creature was a weapon, and how clearly I remembered the pulses, the kills, the movements. I answered with strict facts: the carcass, the bite radius, the blind zones, the crushed drones, the pressure waves, the enormous outline. Nothing more, because I knew anything extra would be twisted into something I did not say. They never raised their voices and never threatened, but there was an intensity in their eyes that made the interrogation room feel colder. After long hours, maybe days, they placed a stack of confidentiality documents in front of me. Not a suggestion, not a request: sign or remain detained. Every man signed. We did not have the luxury of choice. The official report came later, a laughable summary buried deep inside a minor naval operations log. Large marine carcass recovered, identified as an unknown shark species, no threat detected, remains lost due to storm conditions. That was it. No mention of the missing half. No note about the perfect bite. No reference to the wrecked drones. No sonar anomalies. No trench. No pulses. No whale kill. Nothing about the massive life form that dwarfed our submarine. They erased the truth so thoroughly you would think we had recovered a floating tuna instead of witnessing the most terrifying discovery in modern history. Afterward, the Navy reassigned me to shore duty. Paperwork, research, environmental modeling. Safe, clean, controlled. No more deep patrols. I understood the reason without needing to ask. They did not want someone with first-hand knowledge near anything that could match the pattern again. Still, I kept a few personal notes: sketches of angle arcs, copies of non-classified measurements, ratios, scribbled calculations of bite force and jaw radius. Late at night, I would trace the curves again and again, trying to understand just how large that creature truly was. Every time the answer grew worse. The jaw span of the predator was not slightly bigger than a Megalodon. It was more than twice its width. A force capable of crushing steel as easily as bone. The pulses we recorded matched no mechanical source. They were biological, patterns created by mass displacement from something alive. I revisited the timeline of the whale kill, the slow arc of movement, the perfect intercept. That was not instinct. That was precision learned over generations. Predators do not evolve such skill by chance. Months later, Sato contacted me privately on a normal line. No code words, no official tone. She simply asked if I wanted coffee. We met at a small shop near the base. She looked leaner, older, eyes shadowed from long nights. She mentioned that command had awarded her a quiet commendation for exceptional leadership during deep water survey operations. No mention of the monster. She said the Navy had installed a wide passive monitoring network across the region. Long-term systems spread far. They expected something to move again. They did not say the word, neither did I. We did not need to. The trench had not been an empty space. It was a feeding territory, a home, a place claimed by something older than our records. I kept scanning open channels in the months that followed, and every so often a report slipped through. Strange whale strandings, underwater pressure spikes felt by merchant ships, hulls lifted by unseen swells without storms or seismic activity, most entries wild, some believable. One incident stood out: a cargo vessel crossing near our old grid reported a deep surge pushing the hull upward as if something immense passed below. No quake, no storm, no explanation. The report was filed and forgotten. But I knew better, we all did. The trench was still active, the predator was still alive, it hunted on its own schedule, it killed what it wanted, it let us go because it was not hungry, not that day. And sometimes when I think back to that empty eye socket on the Megalodon skull and the perfect clean arc where half its body had been removed, I remember the last line I wrote in my notebook before they sealed the case. It was never the monster we found, it was the thing that killed it, and whatever owns that trench is still waiting in the dark. And that is where the trail goes, cold soldier. The brass wiped the files, the ocean buried the truth, and the thing that swallowed a legend still circles its kingdom far below the reach of light. Maybe one day it will rise again. Maybe one day we will not be so lucky. Until then, remember this: the deep never forgets. If you want more classified recounts, more forbidden encounters, and more battles against the impossible, then tighten your straps, hit that subscribe button, and stand your ground with the Rebel crew. Stay sharp, stay ready. Captain Rebel out.